too far. There's a couple of ways that I train it. The easiest way to train it is the way that I put in the book, which is on a long line. So you'd get your long line, and you wouldn't, when you're long line training, you never let your dog out to the end. Okay, that's absolutely key. So if you allow your dog to run to the end of the line and hit the end of the line, regardless of what they've got on around their neck, whether it's a harness or whether it's a, which I don't recommend, whether it's a collar, a flat collar or a half check, never ever ever a slip lead or a head collar on a long line. But regardless of what the dog's wearing, if your dog gets into the habit of running at the end of the line and slamming at the end of the line, then that's a lot of poundage going through the body, regardless of whether it's a harness or a collar or a half check. And so what we do when we long line train is we always hold a bit in reserve. So if you've got a 10 metre line, then you might hold back 1.5 metres to 2 metres in it, so your dog hasn't got the full length of it, and your dog gets into the habit of not going fully to the end of the line. And I do use a half check when I'm long line training, and the reason for that is you then have a little bit of play in the collar. So what happens is you feel the dog on the line, they'll get a little correction off the half check, and then you've got 1.5 metres to 2 metres that you can give them that little bit of extra leeway on the long line, so that they're not they're not getting the full pressure of it on the neck, which is really important. But the main thing is you don't let your dog on a long line for it to go tanking to the end of the line. So what I do is, with my 1.5 metres to 2 metres of long line still in my hand, is I let the dog slowly let the dog out on the line, and I always start off with this way. So we'll start off as the dog gets towards the end of the line, not completely the line, but as he's wandering towards the end of the line, I turn and head in the opposite direction and give the lead just a little nudge, a little check, and say this way as I'm turning. Now the dog knows from the loose lead walking that if I turn and walk in the opposite direction, it's the dog's job to come and catch up with me. And so the dog will turn and it'll head in the same direction as me, and then he'll get ahead of me again, and I'll say this way, and I'll change direction. So the dog's constantly following me on the walk, rather than just letting the dog range out in front of me. And I would only do long line training in the field. I wouldn't do it on a track, and I wouldn't do it in the woods. So bearing in mind you're on a field, and you'll just be kind of zigzagging across the field, getting the dog to change direction and pay attention to you. And by saying this way, you're making sure that the dog's got half an eye on you. So at this point we're still holding on to the line. Hello Dante. So then the other thing you can do is too far. So when the dog gets too far ahead of you, when it's almost at that point where you've got 1.5 metres to 2 metres left in your hand, then as the dog gets towards the end of the line, as soon as I think the line's going to go a little bit tight, then I'll give the lead a little nudge, I'll give it a little check, whatever words you want to use, just a little check on the lead, and I'd say too far, and the dog will turn. The second the dog starts turning towards me, I praise them. Massive praise. I haven't asked the dog to come back to me, I've just asked the dog to come back within a distance that I want the dog to range at. So I say too far, I say Dandy too far, or Swud too far. They'll turn around and come back and I go, oh, there's a good boy, clever lad, lots and lots of praise. They don't have to come back for the praise, I can do that at distance because I'm just talking to them. And then we'll carry on our walk, and so we'll do that on the walk, so the dog gets used to having a distance that it's going to get called back towards me on. And so the dog learns, well, I'll get this far ahead and I'll not go any further, because in the animal kingdom they will only do things that benefit them, and it doesn't benefit the dog to be constantly being called back to you, because that's a waste of energy. And in the animal kingdom it's all about survival of the fittest. So if they're doing a behaviour that doesn't benefit them at all and that wastes their energy, that behaviour will die. And so this is why too far is so good, because your dogs learn to get, say, 10 paces ahead of you, 15 paces ahead of you, and then slow down and wait for you. Because if they don't, they're going to get told too far, they're going to have to turn around and come so far back. So the other thing that we do on the long line, as well as this way and too far, is to tell the dogs to come. And it's not a formal recall where the dog has to sit really tight in front of you. But if I use the C word, if I use the word come, then my dogs have got to come all the way back to me within touching distance. So if I say come and my hands are in a position where I want to present, I have to come and sit in front of me. That will work for my delivery. But when you first, if you're not looking for, formal presents or anything like that, then when you say come, the dog should come and sit loosely in front of you, online or offline. And then you would take hold of the collar with one hand and reward them with the other. And the reward can be, a little ruffle, it can be a tickle, it can be an ear massage, it can be a sweetie, it can be a good boy, it can be a pat on the head, it can be whatever you want, whatever does it for your dog, whatever gives your dog that warm and fuzzy for coming back to you is what you do when you say come. Most dogs are food motivated, so a bit of food is always a good thing. But always take hold of the collar, even if they're on a long line, take hold of the collar, because what you're doing is you're conditioning the dog that when you say come, their job is to come and sit in front of you, and you're going to take hold of the collar, and that will prevent all of that digging about in front of you, jumping about, dancing about, slightly out of reach. And it's just putting in some really good behaviours for later on, when you're going to call your dog back to you and put the lead on them, or when you're going to call your dog back to you for a presenting of a dummy, for giving over a dummy. That's what you're doing, you're just putting in really, really good habits. So then what I would do, regardless of whether the dog's on the long line or whether the dog's off lead, I would then walk the dog to heel for 10 paces and then release them off again. And again, it's putting in good habits. When you say come, sit in front, have a reward, heel, and then continue with your walk. Too far just means come back within a bit of distance, and this way just means head in the same direction as me but not too far away. So they're the things that I do with long line training. And then I would drop the line, let the dog drag the line behind them, and if I was going to give the dog a command when the line was being dragged, I would make sure that the line was close enough to me that I could stand on it or pick it up. Because the last thing you want is, after having a couple of weeks doing your long line training, for you to drop the line and you to say too far or come and the dog takes off, because that just undoes all of your training. So when you drop the line, make sure it's within distance for you to pick up or stand on. And then when you take the line off, what I would recommend, what I do recommend, is that you skip breakfast. So if, say for example, it's 4:10 and say tomorrow is the first time I'm going to take the long line off my dog out on a walk, I wouldn't feed my dog tonight. I wouldn't feed it. I might give it a little biscuit. Wouldn't feed my dog tonight. Wouldn't feed my dog first thing in the morning. I would go out with some really, really high value treats, and I would let the dog off, and as soon as it went a couple of paces away from me, I would call it back and give it a sweetie. And so that's what I would do. I would have the dog absolutely starving. I mean, your dog can miss a meal, it's not the end of the world, unless your dog's on medication, and then it would need its meal for the medication. But generally, skip the last meal of the day. Morning, don't have breakfast. You never have breakfast before you walk your dog, and then take a really high value treat, and then you can start working off the line. And you can work on your too far, you can work on your with me, and you can this way, and you can work on your recall. Offline, you've got everything set up in your favour for your dog to do as it's told. So I hope that answers everything, Audrey, in relation to too far. I know I did the whole long line training as well, but I said I would put the long line training in there in that particular topic as well. So I hope that that's okay. I hope that covers everything for you. And tomorrow